So welcome everybody. People will continue to be coming in as we start, but we'll begin now. Just a few technical things before we start. I put on setting that all your mics are muted, and that's just so that background noises don't cause interference. We'll make time for comments and questions. Primarily at the end of the session will be more time for kind of downloading and unpacking. And also you're free to drop comments and questions in the chat box, use the chat room as you'd like to. And that's it for the housekeeping piece. I want to welcome you all, Bruchim Habaim, Bruchot Habaot, to this session. This is the first of a 6-part series with Applied Jewish Spirituality, AJS, called Waking Up to Life, the Path of Bracha. I'm Ami Silver. I'll be the teacher and facilitator. For those of you who are trying this out, if you do want to continue and take the rest of the course, so please be in touch with Rabbi Daniel Silverstein. You can be in touch with me if you need to, but Rabbi Daniel's the address to handle registration. You can get to him through the website and also through the email that I sent out. And just in case anybody is wondering, these weekly sessions will be happening on Sundays. They'll be recorded. Everybody who registers is going to be receiving the recordings of the session. So even if you miss the live Zoom time, you'll be able to access it at your own convenience. And we'll have a WhatsApp group throughout, which always is a really lovely space for people to share and continue to kind of share their experiences as we go, learn from one another, support one another throughout the course. So I'm gonna, for those of you who are just coming in, I'll drop the source sheet once again in the chat here, and I'll be sharing it as we enter into our session. And just a few words of introduction before we start with the sources. Brachot, blessings, bracha, is in many ways the single most common Jewish practice. I think it's so common that we probably don't even think about it. It's just everywhere in everything we do as part of our ritual lives, right? Every Shabbat and holiday, the meals, the festive meals, all of the special mitzvot, commandments that are related to all the holidays, they include brachot, include blessings. Life cycle events all include brachot and kinds of blessings. And as far as even just regular practice in the spaces that we might not even consider to be ritual, quote unquote, there are brachot that accompany these moments of everyday living, from waking up in the morning to getting out of bed, going through the morning routine, going to the bathroom, washing our hands, eating food, going to sleep at night. For sure, all of our prayers are filled with brachot. But want us to begin to even just pay some attention to the kind of meta way in which brachot really are suffused. They really suffuse all of the moments of a life of practice and of simple living. It kind of turns living into practice, in a sense. It doesn't so much differentiate between the things you just do as a human being and the things you're doing as part of a religious ritual. There's a bracha here, and there's a bracha there, and there's a bracha in all of these different experiences. And so part of what is important to me and exciting to me about us taking really a close look into it is that it can offer us a chance to really open up the possibilities and opportunities of what this practice can be. Doesn't just have to be a sort of marker of, okay, everybody, we're doing a ritual right now, say the blessing. It also doesn't just have to be a kind of rote formula that people like rattle off because that's what's sort of been ingrained in terms of this is what we do before we eat. It just becomes another habit. And it is a habit in terms of how it's embedded throughout our lives, but relating to it habitually doesn't actually allow us to sort of reap its its spiritual gifts. So part of my goal here is on the one hand for us to get a kind of broader and deeper sense, I'm hoping, of the meaning of bracha, of the functions of bracha, and an experiential sense to allow us to feel brachot, do brachot, be in brachot in ways, and experience brachot in ways that maybe we haven't before. And the beauty of it is that because they're so everywhere, there's actually invitations time and time again, moment to moment, throughout our days, throughout the days of our lives, throughout the turnings of wherever we might find ourselves in experiencing life, encountering life. Bracha can become a kind of portal into experiencing this moment in its not only uniqueness, but also in its sacredness and our tradition, in a way of encountering the reality of divine reality that's here in this moment. And so we're going to be learning and practicing in ways that Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, will help open us up to these encounters and to be able to experience brachot in all kinds of new ways. Okay, so we'll dive in with the sources. And for those of you who came in after we began, there will be some time for sure at the end for questions, comments, and some discussion. There might be some time in between. It'll depend on how the flow goes with the amount of text we want to get through and the time we're going to take. We'll take about an hour and a half today, as the first session tends to take a full hour and a half, and then subsequent sessions might take closer to an hour and a quarter. And I want to invite everybody to use the chat box if you really want to share something, or if there's something on your mind, and I'll be checking in with that intermittently as well. Okay, so I'll share my screen here. And I will just say one more thing, is that if I say something, where I use, everything will be in Hebrew and English, but if I use a term or say something that just doesn't make sense and you're not following, just doesn't compute, and you need to ask a question, you're in charge of the unmute button. So, use it in as is needed. Okay, great. So the first thing I want to start, and this is for those of you who've learned with me in the past, this is just kind of how I like to approach things. I always want to start at the beginning. I want to get to the real fundamentals and not start from all of the accumulated assumptions and habitual ways of relating to things that we've sort of accrued over time. So I want to begin with just the very fundamental question of what is a bracha? What is the meaning of the Hebrew root, Baruch, and the Hebrew word, bracha or Baruch, that we're going to be really engaging with here. So bracha actually, in terms of the Torah, takes us all the way back to the beginning. It shows up in the first time during the 7 days of creation. And here we're at the fifth day of creation in Genesis chapter 1, where God says that the water shall teem with swarms of living creatures, flying creatures all over the sky. This is the creation of all sea life and all birds. And it says that God created the great sea monsters and all of the different kinds of species that crawl on the earth, that are in the water, and winged creatures and birds. God saw that it was good. And now we're in verse 22. And I'll read it in the Hebrew. Vayivarech otam Elokim lemar pru urevu umil'u et hamayim bayamim ve'ha'of yirev ba'aretz. God blessed them meaning all of these creatures that in the Torah is telling spawned from the seas and that are now flying in the skies as well. God blessed all these creatures and said, Pru urevu, be fruitful and multiply, be fruitful and become many, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the flying creatures multiply upon the earth. This is the very first use of Baruch, of bracha. The first blessing of the Torah is this blessing that God gives to all the sea creatures and birds. And it's a blessing, if we pay attention to it, of becoming more, of multiplying and expanding these forms of life throughout the earth. Then we go on a few verses and we'll see the next bracha is very similar. Here's on day 6 of creation when God says, let us make humankind in our image and likeness, etc. And you go down to the next verse, God creates humanity in God's image. In the image of God, God created the human, male and female, God created them. And now we're verse 28, Vayevarach otam Elokim. God blessed them, these human beings. God blessed them and said, Pru uravu, umilu et haaretz. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the land, conquer it, dominate the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every beast that walks on the land. But if we just look at the language of the bracha, Pru uravu, milu et haaretz, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth with yourselves. It's the same blessing that God gave to all of sea creatures the day before in creation, right? The fish and the birds and the creepy crawlers. We have the same blessing that they do, the same fundamental bracha, which is, on the one hand, if we look at the surface and the language, is, procreate and fill the earth. But if we just think of what the fundamental bracha is, the fundamental bracha is God imbuing life with the blessing, and I'm just going to use that word because that's what's here is bracha. You could call it a charge, you could call it a command. It's not a command. It's a blessing that the life that you are shall expand into more of what you are. This is true for sea creatures and the birds of the skies. Is true for human beings. Bracha here is, in a sense, what you are shall expand and become more of you, from you. Life will expand into more life, will create more life. And I'm saying that, and I want to, in a sense, we'll see in the verses that follow, I'm saying that because as we'll see, that bracha is not limited to the particulars of, the procreation of the species, as it might seem here in these verses. But on a fundamental level, it has to do with this kind of expansive quality of life, making more of itself, spreading outward. We'll see here the Midrash, the rabbis teach that this has something to do with not only the bracha that was given to the creatures on days 5 and 6 of creation, but it's actually something fundamental to creation itself, to the very concept or energy through which the world is created. Let's look at this midrash from Genesis Rabbah. Darash Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi taught about Ma'aseh Bereshit, about the act of creation. And he's quoting his teacher Bar Kapara, and he said, Lama nivra ha'olam bevet. Why was the world created with the letter bet? Now this is referring to the opening word of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim. God creates in the beginning, or with the beginning, according to some of the commentators. But Bereshit, it's a curiosity to the rabbis that the Torah, that God chooses to start the Torah with a particular letter, with the letter bet. And we'll see that there's another assumption there. But l'hodiacha. Okay, we'll skip the first teaching. He gives one reason, but then the devar acher, the next reason is what we want to see. Lama nivra olam bevet, v'lama bevet shuhu lashon beracha. Why is the universe created with the letter bet? Because it is an expression of blessing. Bracha starts with a bet. Bereshit starts with a bet. They actually both start with the bet resh, which maybe we'll talk about in subsequent sessions. But it's a curiosity to the rabbis. V'lama lo ba'alef? Wait a minute. Our tradition is about one, isn't it? One God, one creator, a unity of all reality, one divine force that an origin everything comes from. Why would this tradition that's all about one? Why would this divine force and source that is a one create with a two? And if you're not following, what I'm speaking out here is what's known as the gematria, the numerical value of the Hebrew letters. Aleph is the first letter. It's considered to encompass a sense of unity and oneness. Bet is the second letter. It it's one of multiplicity. It's one of doubling, one of twoing. And there's something beneath the language of the rabbis here that they seem to be struggling with. Why would you create with a two instead of a one? Why would you create with the second instead of the first? Aren't we all about oneness? As lama bebet teshu lashon bracha, because it's an expression of bracha. V'lama lo ba'alef, why? But why not with aleph shehu lashon arira? Aleph is an expression of arira, which means cursing, the opposite of bracha. The opposite of bracha. Just kind of parenthetically, there's a few versions of this midrash that show up. Some of them were it's kind of these beautiful descriptions. All of the letters from the end of the aleph bet to the beginning show up before God, making a case why you should create with me. And each one of them in the tellings, God has some reason that this letter has a word associated with it, which is not a very good word. And it's not a word that God wants to create the world through, till you get to bet, which is bracha. And aleph always has to get appeased, because aleph always needs to be related to with importance. Some of the midrashim basically explain that, yes, the world is created with the letter bet, but the Torah at Mount Sinai, the Torah is given, the first words of the Torah start with an aleph. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Anochi I am Hashem your God. The aleph has its place. But when it comes to the creation of the universe, when it comes to the creation itself of Ma'aseh Bereshit, we're talking about something that starts with bet. That starts with the letter bet, that starts with this energy of bracha. And we'll see right away in the next teaching from the Maharal Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Loh of Prague, where he's relating to this midrashic teaching. He says, "Dvarim elu megalim lecha dvarim gedolim." These words of the rabbis, this midrash we just read, it's revealing something very lofty, because it's appropriate, he says, for the universe to be created with the letter bet. And this is because the bet, in particular, it's the beginning of expansion. Because the aleph, it has no multiplicity. Aleph is just one. Anything you multiply by one, it's not gonna create more of the one. Whereas the bet is the beginning of multiplicity, and it's bracha. There's something about creating a world which is, in a sense, moving from one to two, moving from a place of a singular unified origin to there being the possibility of multiplicity, of moreness, of other and expansion. And he goes on and he unpacks the word bracha to show us this. For this reason, the word Baruch, which is the Hebrew root, you can see here bet, resh, and chaf, it's composed entirely of double letters that all imply bracha. The bet in single digits, bet, as I was saying, its numerical value is 2. The kaf, which is the last letter, the kaf is in the tens, which is its numerical value is 20. And the resh of Baruch is in the hundreds. The resh's numerical value is 200. We see that the word Baruch is itself entirely built out of twos, out of doubling, out of multiplying, out of becoming something more than one, more than what it was before. For two-ness is the beginning of multiplicity. This is my translation. What is it in Hebrew? Shemin hasheni hatchalat haribui, the Maharal says, from the second, from that which is second, from that which is two, is the beginning of ribui, of multiplicity and expansiveness. Shuhu biracha, that is what bracha is, he says. He's saying, now this is what it means when the Midrash says the world was created with bet, because it's the expression of bracha, and not with aleph, which is an expression of arur, of cursing. And now the Maharal explains, Kibriyat ha'olam hu haribui shuhu mina shamit barach. Because what is the creation itself? What is the universe? It is that expansion. It is that multiplying out that derives from Hashem Yitbarach, from the Holy Blessed One. It is that double that comes from the one. It is that outward movement, that multiplying, right? And we saw there bracha back in the days of creation. When God gives bracha, it's in a sense imbuing that same energy through creation itself. In a sense, God is turning to all the creatures and saying, I want you to use that same energy through which I created you to expand from within yourselves as well. I create a world through bracha. I create a world that moves from being singular to becoming more. I'm imbuing you with that energy from which within your own self, you can expand. You can become more. You can use your creativity in all its ways. You can have that force and energy of multiplicity, of expansiveness, which is the Maharal's teaching based on this midrash, the very fundamental energy that runs through creation. And therefore, he ends here, it's appropriate for it to be created through bet. It's the beginning of multiplicity and of bracha, and not with aleph. And just, I love this last phrase, Shahabriya hi habracha ba'olam. For creation itself is the blessing in the world. Again, the current of creation, the creative energy of the universe is one of bracha, according to Maharal, one of becoming more, of expansiveness, of ongoing multiplication and becoming more. The next source we're going to look at is applying this similar idea, but taking it now from the conceptual concept of what is bracha, how does it function within creation, to actually applying it more. We'll see the next sources will be applying it more to our practice, because it's one thing, this idea that bracha is about expansiveness, of creativity, of multiplicity, and we can see how that functions within the created universe, within just the way the world functions. But what does it mean then for us to use that language in addressing our Creator? Baruch atah Hashem. Baruch atah. You are Baruch. What does it mean for us to direct blessing or recognize blessing toward God? So this next piece is from Rav Chaim of Volozhin, from the book Nefesh HaChaim. And he says, he wants to explain, what does the word Baruch mean? He says the meaning of the word Baruch is not a term of praise, as the multitudes assume. And here he's relating not just to the common, I think, conventional understanding, but a lot of the medieval commentators and commentators that came before him basically said there was a big theological issue for a lot of rabbis in the Middle Ages. How could it be that us human beings bless God? Isn't there a problem there? Doesn't that seem to imply that we have something to offer God that God doesn't have without us? And a lot of the commentaries in the centuries leading up to Reb Chaim of Volozhin, a lot of the teachers were saying, it doesn't mean that we're adding anything to God's reality. All we're really doing is praising. Baruch atah is just a word of praise. And here Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who's in this book in particular deeply informed by the Kabbalistic tradition, is saying it is not a term of praise. Baruch is something much more than that. We're not just saying, it's very nice, God, that you created this carrot that I'm about to eat. Thank you. It's not a thank you, and it's not a praise. Let's see what he says. Val ha'ameti, ki baruch pirusho lashon tosefet v'ribui. The true meaning of the word Baruch, he says, is increase and multiplication. And now he quotes from all different verses that says, Kachnet birchati, this is when Jacob and his brother Esav reunite, and Jacob says, take my blessing. And other parts in the Torah, God says, God will bless your bread, will bless the fruit of your womb. Many such instances in scripture, these cannot be explained to mean praise. There's no way that when the Torah uses this word bracha, it means praise. Jacob isn't saying to Esav, take my praises. The Torah is not saying God will praise your bread. When the Torah says God will barich et lachmecha, will give bracha, will bless your bread, it means that it's going to be abundant. There's going to be abundance there. It's not just a praise. So he says in all of these instances, it means to increase, to cause multiplication, to cause abundance. And he says in the Zohar speaks about drawing blessings, about pouring out blessings, increasing blessings, addition and multiplication of blessings. So bracha, so far, Chaim Volozhin is saying something very similar to what we saw in the Maharal, that there's some kind of energy of bracha about spreading, about expanding, about bringing abundance. And he says that the Zohar, a section called Raya Mehemna in the Zohar, says the following, and I'll read it in the Hebrew and the Aramaic first. Shebaruch ata havaya perush kemashma'o la'amshacha ula'arka chayin mimekora dechaye lishmei kucha brichu kadisha. The Zohar says that this word Baruch ata Hashem, and here Zohar is giving special attention to the name of God that's used, which we'll look at another time, but the Yud Ke Vav Ke, the four-letter name, Baruch Atah Hashem, the Zohar says it means exactly what it sounds like. It is to draw and bestow life from the source of life to the holy name, the sacred name of the Holy Blessed One. Let's just pause here for a moment and try to understand. And this is, I'll just kind of help give some context. What the Zohar there is speaking about is a well-known verse that if any of you have ever said Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, you've heard this verse. V'achalta v'savata uverachta et Hashem Elokecha. Verse we'll come back to later today. But the Torah says you'll eat, you'll be sated, uverachta et Hashem Elokecha, you will give blessing to Hashem your God. It's a radical phrase. We'll see, it doesn't come up very much in the Torah. The Torah is explicitly saying there's a command to give God bracha, to bless God. Chaim Volozhin and the Zohar is saying this isn't talking about praise. This is talking about the same kind of expansiveness and imbuing with energy that we were talking about earlier. The Zohar is saying this is what Baruch Atah Hashem means. Baruch Atah Hashem means to draw life, to pour life from the source of life into infusing Yud Ke Vav Ke, infusing the divine name, infusing the quote unquote identity of God in this universe. We're not going to fully unpack this phrase right now, but what I want at this point for us to just begin to consider that there's something active the Zohar is describing happening here through bracha. It's not just a nice thing to say, and it's actually more than a kind of mindful reminder. That's also really important. Remembering that the food we're about to eat is gifted to us and comes from somewhere. Remembering that the moment we're about to engage in or the act is something sacred that deserves our attention. Brachot are really helpful in those terms. But the Zohar is saying that there's something even more active that's happening, that Baruch Atah Hashem is that there's a kind of bracha is directing life from the source of all life to, let's just let the Zohar speak in its own language, the name of the Holy Blessed One, to the name of God. And we'll unpack this a bit more as we go on. Zohar goes on, it says, V'achalta v'savata uverachta et Hashem Elokecha. That's very clear. The Zohar says, it's plainly stated, you will bless Hashem Elokecha, you will bless God. Ve'inun birkain arik barnash be'inun milin ayin sham ba'orech. And these blessings that the Zohar is referring to, the Zohar says a person is able to pour out, is to direct toward God through the words of their blessing of Birkat Hamazon. So here, just to kind of summarize what Chaim Volozhin Nefesh Chaim is saying here, bracha is not a praise. It's not just something that we say to give thanks to God or recognize God, but there's something active. There's something even transformative. There's almost like an exchange that happens where some kind of cause and effect, the Zohar is saying, that happens from our bracha in the divine realm itself. In the divine reality itself, the bracha has some kind of ripple effect there, drawing life from the source into the name of God. And I'll just say one more word on that for those of us who maybe aren't so familiar with the kind of world or conception of the Zohar. Maybe it sounds very strange. What do you mean the source of life is different from God? It's kind of strange, right? Drawing life from the source of life onto the name of God. The Zohar, very briefly, operates from a perspective in which there are very different layers and expressions of the divine. And there are those which are completely transcendent. There are those which are completely immanent and functioning here in our reality, and everywhere in between. And there's a dynamic relationship between these different facets of the divine, between these different godly qualities, between these different realms of reality. And the name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, the name of God, as the Zohar is referring to, is in a sense representative of one central expression of God in the universe and creation. But there's something that the Zohar is referring to, which is the source of all, that's also an expression of, that there's God beyond name, that there's God beyond creation, God beyond world, and that there's some kind of process that Baruch Atah Hashem is, in a sense, partaking in, which is to draw life, to suffuse the godly reality of the name of God in the Zohar's language, of Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, of the God that we are relating to, suffusing it with more of this vital energy. We're going to look at a number of sources now that are touching on actually somewhat similar aspects, but also referring now a little more to the formula of brachot as we say them. This first source is actually a halachic source, is a source in legal source from the book Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Chiel Michal Epstein, who not always, but sometimes we find him kind of trying to integrate both halachic ruling and Kabbalistic thought together. But here's his take. He says, that which we say in our blessings, Baruch Atah, and here you're going to see right away a kind of counterpoint to what we just read. It doesn't mean that the Blessed One requires our blessings, God forbid. Baruch Atah, don't even entertain the thought, the Aruch HaShulchan says, that God needs blessing from us mortals. Rather, and here he's bringing in a Kabbalistic explanation for the function of bracha, hukmo or hachozer. Rather, the brachot we make, it functions as a reflective light, is what's known as an or chozer. In the Kabbalah of the Arizal, Lurianic Kabbalah, there's this concept of or yashar and or chozer. Or yashar is, in a sense, the beaming light from the source of light, in the sense of the kind of energy that God shines toward creation. And the or chozer is the light that returns, that reflects back from us toward our Creator. So it's not merely a praise that we say. It's not really like, aha, this came from somewhere, but there is a kind of receiving and letting that divine light that we receive bounce back toward God. And actually, you'll see in a moment, has a kind of effect to it as well in this conception. It functions like a reflective light in Or Chozer in order for God to bestow blessings upon us. We'll read a little bit and then we'll unpack. As David said, and from you is this beautiful bracha, beautiful verse. I'll read in Hebrew. From your blessings, the house of your servant shall be blessed forever. From your blessings, my house will be blessed forever. And the reason that we need to arouse this, he's going on, if there's an Or Chozer, right, what he just said in these lines is that our reflective light has an effect for God to then bestow more blessing upon us. In a sense, I receive light, I reflect that light and return it, and there's a kind of, when it re-encounters its source, it sort of allows for there to be more of that direct light to come back into our universe. It's almost like thinking of like the water cycle, that it kind of goes back into the higher realms and comes back down to replenish the earth. So the light of blessing works this way too. Bracha comes to us from the source, we reflect it back, and it kind of energizes the source to grant more. And the reason we need to arouse us, he's asking the question, well, why is that necessary? Why do we need to participate in this? It would make more sense. Just, God gives what God wants to give. What do we have to do with it? What does our bracha have? Why does our bracha have any place here? And the reason for this is, as it's written, Tznu oz le'Elohim. Give power or give strength to God. In other words, in a sense, he's coming from a very fundamental viewpoint of the Jewish faith in general, which is that human action is ultimately meaningful. He's saying all matters depend upon our actions. The things we do, they affect everything. And everything is affected by our activities. And so in that sense, it's incumbent upon us to add strength to the Pamalia Shalmala. I translated here's awkward translation, the legions above. Vaz Tereda Brachala, and then the blessing will descend upon us. The Pamalia Shalmala, sometimes that word Pamalia, and it seems like an Aramaic term, but borrowed probably from another language. It's like the familia, the Pamalia Shalmala, the familia above, the kind of heavenly realms and all of the forces and energies and realms of existence in more transcendent planes. Our actions are in resonance with and in relationship with. And when we direct Baruch Atah Hashem, we direct our attention and our energy toward our divine source and toward everything in the more transcendent realms, so it's energized by us. We are in this kind of mutual relationship, and we grant energy, we give our energy to that realm that also then grants us blessing, that we give energy to and it grants us blessing. And he brings more sources to support this idea. It says, Rochev Shamayim Be'ezrecha. This is from the last parsha in the Torah of Path of Bracha, which we read not long ago in Simchat Torah. The one who rides in the heavens Be'ezrecha, with your help. That's how Moses describes God to the Jewish people. The one who rides in heaven with your help. If you pay attention also, that Hebrew word rochev, the rider. I don't know if this was intentional by the Aruch HaShulchan, but the rider, the letters of that word rochev is the same letters as Baruch. If you change them around, the bet to the beginning, Baruch. Rochev Shamayim Be'ezrecha. In a sense, we are adding fuel to divine activity as well. Okay, so that's his kind of conception a little bit. What is a bracha? How does it function? And now he's going to speak more about the formula. Ubechol habrachot v'hatfilot, in all prayers and all blessings, we speak, we address God, we address the Blessed One, b'lashon nochach, in the language of presence, which in our kind of more common usage would mean in second person. We say Baruch Atah. We turn to God address God with immediacy, with the term of immediacy. Atah, you. You're right here. In Hebrew, it's called Lashon Nochach, which I love. In modern Hebrew, they say Guf Sheni, second person. But Lashon Nochach, in the rabbinic usage, it's a language of presence. Baruch Atah, I'm returning to God and saying you. It implies presence here and immediacy. You're right here. And in other prayers, Bizmarot, Hodaot, in other prayers, Yesh Kama Shomrim Atahu. In other prayers, we sometimes address God as Atahu. Atahu Elokeinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, might be familiar. But Atahu, which is both present and concealed, Nochach and Nistar. In our usage, it would be Ata is second person, Hu is already third person. It's as if we're saying, you are it, you are the one. We're saying you, but then immediately in the next word, we're saying that you are not you, you are it, you are that which is. So now he's going to unpack some of this. He says it can be understood as follows. Why would we be speaking to God, addressing God in this, what's called Lashon Nochach V'Nistar, present and hidden, revealed and concealed? And he explains the following. The essence of the Blessed One is hidden beyond all hiddenness. Ne'elam mikol ne'elam. The essence of God's, if we can even call this self, is completely unknowable, impenetrable. Even the Srafim and Ofanim don't know it. He says even the heavens, the angels of the heavens don't know it. He's referring, I believe, to what's there in the prophecy of Ezekiel, and we say it in our Kedusha, Ayeh Makom Kvodo, that the angels are asking, where is God's glory? We don't even know, the angels say. We don't know where God is. Nobody knows that kind of essential divine. It's completely hidden. But all of creation recognizes divine reality through God's activity through what God does through the creation itself, through existence itself. We don't know what is beyond it, but we know of God through that which God creates and does. So similarly, we say atahu. When we say those words together, atah, when we say refer to God as you, again, lashon nochach, you are present. The Aruch HaShulchan is saying, I'm referring here to you regarding your activity. What is God doing? How am I coming to know God through what's happening in the world? That's when I'm referring to God as you. But when I use the term who, which is that transcendent, that third person, referring to God as if God is not here right in front of me, I'm referring to God's essence that is beyond the experience that I'm having in this moment, or the activity, or the thing that I can recognize. And atahu, it's not what we're going to focus on right here in brachot, but we'll see that it's relevant as well. Atahu is in a sense moving first through which I encounter. I return to that which I encounter as you, God as you. And then I immediately also recognize that there is something beyond what I'm able to perceive and conceive of and touch here, which is who, which is vast and hidden from me. And perhaps even that the you that I'm encountering, the immediate experience that I'm encountering, is not separate from that transcendent hidden one, but is actually one manifestation of that which lies beyond it as well. And so he goes on, he says, so in our prayers, when we're making requests of God to act on our behalf, we're speaking about God's activities. And that's why in all of the brachot he's referring to now in the Shemona Esrei prayers, for example, it's all Baruch atah, you. We're always referring to you. He's saying whenever we're talking to God about what's happening in the here and now, about what we want to be experiencing or what we are experiencing in the here and now, it's always through the language of you. Similarly, he says, in all kinds of blessings, like the blessings over food, when we're talking about God has created this fruit or this bread, we're always talking about God's activity. We're relating to what is here in the immediacy of our experience. And we're saying Baruch atah, because I get to know you in terms of what is in front of me, in terms of what I'm able to experience. So too in brachot related to mitzvot. Baruch atah Hashem asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. In mitzvot too, we're talking about the mitzvah that I'm about to engage in or engaging in right now. If I'm holding my lulav, I'm referring to this moment and this experience. It's always going to be atah. I'm always going to be calling God you when it's in that space of immediacy. So too, he says, with the types of blessings, for example, there's a blessing about when you see an ocean or a river, when you haven't visited the sea for 30 days and you end up going to the beach, there's a special blessing to say there. Or blessings over thunder and lightning. We're always referring to God in these brachot as atah, as you, and it's in present form because we're encountering it in immediacy. The reason I think this is so important is because when it comes to the practice of brachot, we're always relating to something that is right here, right now, in our field of experience. We're always relating to our experience in the current moment. And he basically lays that out here. If it's a bracha over a mitzvah, it's the mitzvah. The only reason I'm making a bracha is because I, in this moment, am engaging with this mitzvah, with this commandment. If it's a bracha over food, it's not theoretical, talking about, God creates food, God creates tomatoes. That has nothing to do with the practice of brachot. The practice of brachot has to do with what I, in my own individual realm of experience, am experiencing. I pick up a tomato, that elicits bracha. That is the reason I'm saying a bracha, because I'm encountering something in my own experience. It's not theoretical. It's not conceptually about God. It is relating to the actual encounter with life in this moment, in my embodied experience. Just give kind of like forecasts of one of the places we're going to go and explore much more deeply in this course is the morning blessings, the blessings that are said upon waking up in the morning. For many people, those blessings are either something that they We're taught at some point to just say at some point in the morning, or which are printed in the siddur and are said at shul as part of the prayer services. But we'll see that actually in the sources, in the Talmudic sources of these blessings, they're actually meant to accompany each and every step of our process of waking up throughout the day, of coming to awareness, of being awakened from sleep, of opening our eyes, of sitting up straight, of putting our feet on the ground, of putting on our clothing. Step by step, stage by stage, the brachot are actually accompanying our experiences. And a main focus of ours in this course is going to be to really deepen into our experience itself and the practice of saying brachot, enacting brachot from that place of experience and from within that field of experience rather than from the mouth and outward. Okay, so for me, the essential teaching here that the Aruch HaShulchan is giving to us is the way that ata, that you, is a encounter with God in the present, both in time and in space, not only in the present moment, but in the actual activity I'm engaged in this moment. Just take a moment and look at the chat box. There's a Okay. I'm not gonna pause to relate to all of the comments of this moment, but the next source is from Rabbi David Abu Darham, who was a Spanish rabbi in the 14th century who wrote a commentary on all of the prayers. And here's what he says. He says, I was asked about the matter of blessings. He says, why is it that in the beginning one speaks directly to God as if God's right there before you, right? You say Baruch atah. But then at the end, it's as if God's not right there before us. And here he's referring to, let's just say, Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, God. Elokeinu melech haolam. We're starting to kind of describe now who and what God is as not the you necessarily. Borei pri ha'adama, the one who created, the one who creates. And actually, this is also an important piece, is that our brachot, almost all of our brachot are phrased in the present tense. It's not the one who created fruit of the earth, but who creates. The one who creates fruit of the earth. Why is it that we move from you to then descriptors about the one? Why do we move from immediacy to as if God is elsewhere? And he says he found a reason for this based on a midrash. Midrash referring to what's written, Shiviti Hashem l'nagi tamid, I place God before me always. In other words, I relate to God always as if God is right here in front of me. He says when a person says God's name and says Baruch atah Hashem, he says God is present before them. You, God, you're right here. I can call it you. I can call you you. And then once the person says Melech HaOlam, they're already talking about God. They're not talking to God anymore. This is the transition. We start the bracha talking to God, and then we start talking about God. When the person says Melech HaOlam, it seems that God's not before them anymore. Because it means that the one who is our Elokeinu is the one who commands us in the commandments. Okay, I'm not going to kind of nitpick into his language, but he's basically saying something somewhat similar to the way that the Aruch HaShulchan was talking about Ata and Hu, but he's regarding it in the bracha itself, in the format of the bracha. What we're saying is that transcendent one is the one who is the source of the experience upon which I'm saying it's you, it's here, it's right now. Here he's talking about the bracha of a mitzvah. I'm doing a mitzvah. You're right here in front of me. You're right here with me. And as I encounter the you that's right here, I also give awareness to the source beyond this one moment and experience from which this experience derives. And he goes on and he quotes another teacher, the Ribach, who says that the reason the blessings were formulated using what's called Lashon Nochach v'Nistar, both present and concealed, second and third person, just because of beautiful explanation here. It's because the Holy Blessed One is revealed and hidden, because God is here and beyond here, is both apparent and invisible, revealed in terms of activity, and hidden in terms of divine nature itself. But not only that, he goes on, the soul too. The soul is both apparent and invisible. The soul is also revealed and hidden. And therefore, the nefesh, the soul within me, when I make this bracha, I make a bracha both with presence and with concealment. In a sense, I'm relating to the divine realities that are revealed and that are not revealed, that are concealed and hidden from my experience and perception by making the full bracha. But he's saying something just so powerful, which is I'm also engaging the parts of my own being, which are both revealed and which remain concealed and hidden. As it says, my soul shall bless Hashem, borchi nafshi et Hashem v'chol kravai et Shem kodsho, and all of my innards blessing God's holy name. There's parts of me that are apparent, and there's parts of me that are concealed. And all of the, in a sense, layers of my being are engaging with bracha in these different layers of divine reality that are kind of being encountered in this moment. And he goes on, he says that the bracha too, it involves speech from the mouth and the awareness of the heart. The heart is hidden, the voice is heard. There's a part of my bracha which is also revealed and also hidden. There's the words and the sounds coming out of my mouth, and there's the intention, the inner sense in my heart that accompanies it. And a person too is composed of both body and soul. And it's appropriate for them to be attached to their maker and stand in its presence at all times on account of the soul. But the body's not capable of this. So therefore one blesses their creator in presence and in hiddenness. So this is his conception of it, that there's our soul has the ability to be in God's presence all the time. And our body on the revealed sense doesn't have that awareness. So there's parts that are hidden, and there's parts that are revealed. There's parts that are apparent. There's parts that are not, that are concealed. And a bracha is an invitation to bring awareness to all of that, and to engage all of that, to engage my present experience and reality. As we were speaking a moment ago, I'm experiencing something in this moment. I'm bringing to it the recognition that it's a expression of something of God. It's something that's a product of the origin and source of all existence and being and life. And I too am a product of the origin of all existence and life. And in a sense, I'm letting myself participate in that awareness and in that reality in these moments where the felt sense and perception can become, in a sense, include perception of divine reality in this moment and experience, and can also hold the awareness of that which I cannot perceive. That there's something beyond what I'm experiencing here that all of this is emerging from. The next sources, I believe, are going to help refine this even a little more. I couldn't help but, given that we just read the Parsha of Lech Lecha, and we're in the stories of Abraham, just read this Parsha on Shabbat. Abraham is, in a sense, a person who embodies bracha in such an ongoing way. We see from the very beginning of the Abraham story, God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha, right? Go from your home. And I'm just going to skip to the next verses. Look what God says to Abraham. Eschal goy gadol, I'll make you a great nation, ve'avarechecha, and I will bless you, and I'll make your name great. V'heyeh bracha, and you will become a blessing. You will be a blessing. V'avarcha mevarechecha, I will bless those who bless you. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. There's 4 or 5 different ways in which God is saying to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, bring blessing to you, bring blessing through you, you will become a blessing. That's the first communication between God and Abraham. Just going to, in a sense, infuse you with bracha, and let bracha be something that pours out from you to the rest of the world. We'll read 2 midrashim now about Abraham and what this might mean. So the first one is on this word, this phrase, v'hiyeh bracha, you will be a bracha. Kribe brecha. The Midrash says it's written in bracha, which means a blessing, but read it, right? The Torah doesn't have vowels, doesn't have punctuation marks. So the Midrash can play with punctuations. Let's say the punctuation says something different, not bracha, but brecha. A brecha is a pool. When God says to Abraham, be a bracha, the Midrash is saying, actually God is saying to Abraham, be a pool of water. Just as a pool purifies the impure, right? This is the image of a mikvah, the image of water through which somebody who has, for whatever reason, been disconnected from their ability to contact God goes through the water and, in a sense, removes that barrier to encounter God anew. So just like a pool brings purity to those who have become distanced or impure. You too, Abraham, will bring close those who have been distanced and purify them. In a sense, this sense of tahara is a kind of allow them to become transparent to their source, allow them to become once again cleansed and returned to the kind of innate attachment between their soul and their creator. Cleanse them like a pool. You will be a walking pool. That's the bracha of Abraham. It's a brecha. It's a pool of water that brings people in contact with their origin, with their source. And there's actually a midrash in the Talmud, which is quite often quoted and kind of taught even at very early ages, which is that the way that Abraham taught the world about God is actually through the practice of blessings, of brachot. The Talmud says that our ancestor Abraham caused the name of the Holy Blessed One to be called out in the mouths of all passersby. How so? This is what we're going to see actually Abraham and Sarah in next week's parsha. They bring in the wayfarers, they bring in the travelers to their house and give them food and water, right? So this here, the Gemara is kind of expanding part of what that scene, what happens in that scene, but that the way that Abraham and Sarah basically function in the world. People would walk by, they'd come into their tent, they'd get food and drink. After the people ate and drink, they would stand up to bless him, to bless Abraham, right? Their host. He said to them, did you eat from what is mine? Did you eat my food? You ate from the God of the universe. You ate from the creator of all. In a sense, you want to thank me for the food you ate? I didn't create that food. Give thanks and praise. Bless. Direct your blessing to the one she'amar v'hayahu olam, that which spoke and brought creation into existence, brought the world into being. That this is like the fundamental way in which Abraham taught what we call monotheism. What does it mean that Abraham taught the world about one God, about one source? He gave people food. And he said, oh, you ate food, right? It's a wild thing that in this universe, we can take things that grow in this earth and ingest them, and they grant us life. Well, you know what? I'm not responsible for that. I didn't do that. That's the function of reality that comes from somewhere, that this entire universe derives from. And in this way, this is, I think, an example of Abraham being that purifying pool, right? He's in a sense removing the dross, removing the filters, to just kind of open people's awareness to, where does this all come from? Where do we all come from? Baruch l'mishamar v'hayahu olam. Direct your blessing to the one who speaks this world into being, to the one who is, and I think it's not a common term for God, the one who speaks the world into being. And I think we can maybe infer from here too that Abraham was teaching that, this is a kind of ongoing, there's a communication here. There's an expressiveness here to creation. it's not just thank God for what you have, right? It's not some kind of moralistic, like, don't thank me, thank God. It's in a sense directing the attention to the appropriate source from where it emerges and the way in which it emerges. There's a kind of divine expressiveness that this life all emerges from. The one who speaks creation into being, the one who speaks life alive. There's something kind of living and happening in that space. And it's an invitation of one of contact. Someone spoke this all into being. You can turn back and speak your praise in return. The next sources are going to pick up on that image of a pool, of a stream, of something that is kind of living waters. Okay, this is a Kabbalistic teaching from Rav Yosef Shikatilia, the Sha'arei Orah, a kind of primary Kabbalistic source in the Middle Ages. And his book is all about different names of God. Okay, what are the different names of God and how do they each function? And here he's talking about the name Adonai, very common, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. He says that the Adonai, the name Adonai, it's like a receptacle. Okay, and it's a receptacle to receive the abundant flow of all blessings and all forms of emergence. It's like a pool or a Beit Kibul, again, a receiving receptacle. And this is the reason he has a linguistic reason for explaining the name Adonai this way, because it comes from the word of Adnei HaChatzer. In the construction of the Mishkan, there were sockets dug in the earth to hold up the pillars of the sanctuary. Those silver sockets dug into the earth were called Adnei HaMishkan. It's spelled exactly like the name Adonai. I'm going to highlight it here. Adnei HaChatzer, the sockets of the courtyard. Shevehem nichnasim hamudim, that's what the pillars rest into. And we find that there were 100 silver sockets in the Mishkan. And don't worry, we'll get to bracha. There were 100 silver sockets in the Mishkan. And these 100 silver sockets correspond to the 100 pools that are filled from the great pool called Adonai. Okay, this is the Kabbalistic imagery he's bringing here. The brecha, the mea brechot, 100 pools that are filled with, water or just divine energy and sustenance from the brecha hagedolah, from the great pool, the divine pool. In a sense, the image here is of some kind of higher source of water that then has like rivulets and ways of streaming into all of these 100 pockets of water. And therefore, he's quoting now a teaching from the Gemara and Menachot. For that reason, chayav adam nevarech mea brachot b'chol yom kedei lamshich in kol achat ve'echad. For this reason, a person's obligated to recite 100 blessings each day, to draw from each and every one of these pools. This is a teaching from the Gemara that says we need to make 100 blessings a day. And he's bringing here a Kabbalistic, mystical explanation of that. Just to kind of like make it clear, for the Gemara and the commentators sort of break down that calculation for people who say the daily prayers and pray 3 times a day. That already takes care of like 3/4 of this quota. Then if you eat a couple meals, you go to the bathroom, you do a few things over the course of the day, you say Birkat HaMazon, you're well over 100. But there's actually practices even in some communities to on Shabbat to make extra brachot on different kinds of food and smells to reach the quota. But we're not so interested here in the quota per se, but in this imagery and this concept of there being, in a sense, a great pool and the smaller pools to collect and receive that sustenance and that energy into. And those pools, those what are called the 100 pools, and the imagery of the Mishkan is so powerful, they're literally dug into the earth to uphold the sanctuary, the space of the Shekhinah on the earth. There's literally holes dug into the ground to construct this space, this sacred space for God to dwell among us. The 100 brachot in our practice are those pockets we dig into our daily living and experience, constructing a space for God's presence to dwell here with us. From the Brecha Ha'elyona to these 100 Brechot or Barachot. The next teachings are from Rabbeinu Bachya ben Asher, in his commentary actually on that verse, Ve'achata v'sav'ata u'virachta t'Hashem Elokecha, as we mentioned earlier, the verse of you will bless God after the grace after meals. And he says, Yesh chalit orer kan, he's in his commentary on the Torah. Literally, it means you should wake up here. When you read these words, achata v'sav'ata u'virachta, wake up. Because in this verse, there is a petach, an opening, a gateway, lahavin sod habrachot, for understanding the secret of brachot. Because we don't find anywhere else in the entire Torah where God commands us to bless God's own name, except for right here. And he brings other verses from Psalms and other writings where there's a similar sentiment expressed. And Rabbeinu Bachya, in his commentary, he likes to give a pshat, remez, drash, sod, different layers of interpretation, from the simple meaning to the mystical meaning. And I'm going to actually just kind of paraphrase the first part, just for time's sake. He says, according to the plain meaning of this, the basic assumption here is that blessings serve no need for God. It's merely human needs. Because, and this is something I mentioned earlier, God is the source of all blessings, the source of all life. What good would it be? What good would it do for God, for us creatures who come from God, to be walking around all day saying, bless you for this, bless you for that, bless you, God? He basically says on the pshat level, on the kind of simple or surface level of this commandment, it's not for God's sake. It's not for God's need. It's for our needs. Brachot are fulfilling human needs. And the human needs that they're fulfilling, this might be kind of a surprising twist to some of us, the human needs they're fulfilling is that when we are faithful in terms of our recognition of what God has given us, so then God will grant us more of it. Right? This is based on also the Talmud that came centuries before him, basically saying that bracha, the brachot we make, kind of bring more abundance to the world around us, and preventing ourselves from making brachot or withholding brachot is a form of thievery, the Gemara says. And he quotes this later, and I didn't bring it here in the translation, but it's as if stealing, because the brachot we make allow for there to be kind of more divine will to grant more blessing to the universe. He's saying that's all pshat level. It has nothing to do, God doesn't need our brachot, we need this practice of brachot. But then he says, according to the path of Kabbalah, Uberachtat Hashem, you shall bless God, it means that this blessing is not merely serving human needs, nor is it a mere expression of gratitude. Rather, it is a term that means to increase and multiply, similar to God will bless your bread and water. This is we've seen. And it's derived from the word brecha, a pool that flows out from its source. Okay, so the Rabbeinu Bachya is saying, in the Kabbalistic understanding, the mystical understanding, bracha does, in a sense, give God more of God in some remarkable way. Therefore, in our prayers, and here it gets very concrete, we say, Titbarech, Tit Romem, we say these words, let you be blessed, may you be blessed and elevated. He's reading it actually in a causal way. We'll give you bracha so that you can become more elevated, God. Or similarly in Kaddish, thinking about the language of Kaddish, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitbar, V'yitromam, V'yitnasei. You will be blessed, and you will be praised, and you will be glorified, and you will be elevated and exalted. He's reading bracha here as somehow increasing, causing there to be a more abundance in the divine realm. You will be elevated when we give you bracha. So it's different from the Or Choser, right, that the Aruch HaShulchan talked about, of we reflect back the light so God can bring us more abundance. Here you're saying, no. It's actually increasing something for God's own sake. And he brings one other meaning, which is it's also an expression. But so that's the meaning that's related to brecha, to a pool. Here he says it's also an expression of kneeling and bowing. Bericha, a berech in Hebrew, is a knee. When Isaac, we'll meet Isaac in a few parshiot, when Isaac Actually, when Abraham's servant brings Rivka from her home to meet Isaac in the field, it says, Vayavrech et hagmalim. He lowers the camels onto their knees. Vayavrech, berech, to bow, to kneel. He's saying bracha has something to do with the bending of the knee, with kneeling. Mi shekol berech korea lo. Here he's quoting a verse, the one to whom all knees bend and bow. This is as we find in the Sefer HaBahir. I'm just going to jump right into the Sefer HaBahir that he's quoting from. Sefer HaBahir is an early anonymously authored Kabbalistic work. It's kind of written in mystical poetry and riddles. So the Bahir says the following: how do we know that bracha is and it comes from the word Baruch, to bless? Maybe it comes from berech. Maybe bracha comes from the word that means knee. As it says in Isaiah, Ki li tichra kol berech. You might recognize that language from the Aleinu prayer. Tichra kol berech. It says in Isaiah, all knees shall bend to me. The Sefer Bahir says, Makom shekol berech korea. You are the place, the location, the destination to which all knees bend. To what can this be likened? To people who want to see the face of the king, but they don't know where his house is. First, they ask, where's the king's house? And then they can ask, where's the king? Similarly, Ki li tichra kol berech. All knees shall bend to me. God says, all knees bend to me. Va'afilu elyonim, the Sefer Bahir says, even in the higher realms, even the angelic realms, even the more transcendent realms, all existence bows to God. Tishava kol lashon. That's the next part of that verse, and I think the Bahir is probably reading this as the next step. All knees bend to me, and then every tongue shall swear, in a sense, shall speak my truth. Let's just kind of unpack this riddle for a moment. The analogy of those who want to seek the face of the king, but they don't know where his house is. So they ask, where's the king's house? And then they can say, where's the king? Similarly, all of creation bows to God, and then speaks. And then, in a sense, can express God's truth. What I believe the Bahir is saying is that brachot function in a similar way. A bracha is the kneeling of creation towards its creator. A bracha we want to seek God's face. So bracha is, I first need to find God's house. First need to literally bend myself into, just kind of want to relate this now and kind of place it within some of the sources we've seen before. Bracha is something that we're bringing a certain kind of awareness to the moment and experience that we're engaging in, that we're having in this moment. In a sense, we are kneeling into that, sinking into that experience, immersing ourselves into that moment, entering into God's house, and then speaking to God and of God, encountering the face in the language of the Bahir. But the first act is an act of both ourselves kind of sinking in, immersing into the experience, but also with a greater awareness that li tichra kol berech, all of existence, not just will bow to God as an activity, but in an essential way, all of reality bends and bows to God. All of reality exists in God's sphere, God's realm. All of reality is dependent on God for its own being and existence. When we engage in bracha, where in a sense, whether it's literally or figuratively, bringing ourselves, is the image of bending down to earth, is the way the Bahir is depicting what's happening when we're making the bracha. We're bringing ourselves closer to the point of contact with reality in this moment. And when we come close to it, we are, in a sense, finding the king's house according to this parable, and then we can seek the face, and then we can discover what is truly here. Because our time is a little limited, I want to just jump down to the bottom source here. And for those of you who want to look at home, I brought two verses that are referring to forms of the knees bending as ways of, in a sense, approaching God. The last source I want to bring is the Hasidic teaching from Rav Menachem Twersky of the Chernobyl Rebbe, the Maori Naim. This is also on Lech Lecha, on the Parsha of Avraham, and that word that God said of Avarechacha, I will bless you. Here, and he's not the first person to say this, he says, Havarechacha is Lashon Havracha. Havracha, similar to being, something bending toward earth, Havracha agriculturally means grafting. Havracha is bending the branch of one tree into the earth so that I can grow a new sprouting, a new tree growing from it. It's grafting one tree into the earth to grow a new one. That's called havracha. So he says, when God says to Abraham, va'avarechecha, God is saying, I'm going to graft you. Let's see how he explains it. Because he says the Torah is the tree of life. There's a tree. And the Holy Blessed One is one with the Torah and is likewise called the tree of life. Saying God is a tree, is the tree of all life, is the mother tree. And this is the great tree that is grafted upon the small tree. Zehu ilana ravrava v'nevarech be'ilana zuta. The small tree, which is the human being. In the verse, it's Abraham, but the Chernobyl are saying that's all of us. God is saying, I'm grafting the big tree onto you. You are my small tree growing from the mother tree. And in this way, va'avarechecha l'shon havrachat ilan be'ilan. When God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, it's referring to the act of grafting one tree onto another, the great tree onto the small tree, the origin of life to grow and is allowed to sprout and emerge an seemingly independent life, but one that truly emerges and grows up from that source, that greater tree, from which it is merely an extension, a smaller version of. So, there was a lot we packed into this. It was important for me that we get some basic kind of categories and directions and ways of approaching the meaning of bracha that will serve us in subsequent sessions, that we'll be able to kind of go more deeply into the sense of, just kind of summarize here what we've seen. Expansive, the energy of expansiveness, that kind of fundamental energy of creation that allows for life to emerge and increase constantly. The interplay between what is apparent and concealed, what is revealed and what is hidden, what is here in my field of perception, and what lies beyond what I can perceive in this moment, and actually the connection between these two things. That what's happening here is, in a sense, a streaming brook, and I like to think that the word brook also comes from the word Baruch, is a streaming brook that's, in a sense, bubbling out from that brecha hagdola, or what's called the brecha ha'elyona, that great pool of all life energy, of all source. That when we make bracha, we're making space for those streams and those rivulets to be drawn out and to experience the moment that we are encountering as something that is streaming, that isn't static. Again, think about the bracha over a fruit. It's not, here's a fruit. God made this fruit. What a wonderful thing. I'll eat it now. It's borei, it's the whole process of bracha till we get to borei pri ha'etz, that whole relationship to this moment, the origin of life, to that which lies beyond, is in this moment borei pri ha'etz, creating fruit of life. The apple's not static either. And it's in a sense bending into the experience of that moment is allowing ourselves to fully feel the kind of dynamic, emergent reality in this moment, and to bring an awareness of God to that experience. What I'd like to do with just the next few minutes we have left here, 10 or so minutes we have left, is guide us in a little bit of a practice that's really just dipping our toes in the water, really just to kind of get a little bit of a sense of relating to things in the realm of bracha, in that dynamic, kind of emergent way. And we'll build on these practices as we go through the course till we can really engage with the full stage by stage process that each bracha encompasses. So the plan here is just we'll spend a few minutes in practice, and I'll stay on another probably up to 10 minutes or so afterwards for some discussion, questions, or thoughts that people want to share. So let's just take a moment and come to the present. We've said a lot of words. We've touched on a lot of ideas. You've probably had a lot of things go through your mind, associations and thoughts, and maybe even just take a check-in with your surroundings. You know, we're not just here on the screen. Just sense yourself in the place that you are. And here, you know, if you feel more comfortable with your camera on or off, I'll leave that to you. And everything that I invite here, and the practice is a suggestion and invitation, and it's not, you know, you do what feels right for you. If something feels pleasant, you want to stay with, do that. If something feels not what you are, you want to go, do that. Okay. And so what we'll do here is begin to let our attention come inside. Begin to let our awareness settle into the internal realm of our own experience. And help to take a few fuller breaths, slower breaths. And just let your body fill with air. Let out that air. And with each breath, feeling the sensations inside kind of settle in just a little more. Letting the attention gently settle inside as well. And maybe if it feels right to close your eyes, if it feels right for you, you can keep your eyes open. The goal here is to orient ourselves, let our attention really be just for these few minutes in the internal space of our experience. Get in touch with just the basic sensations of the body. The feeling of your back against the seat, contact, the weight of your body supported on the surface you're on. Just feeling into the sense that is there. The sensations of your soles of your feet touching your shoe or the floor or the ground. Letting your attention just be inside that space of sensation. What we're going to do is to explore within the space of the body and its experience. Going to approach it with, in a sense, the attention of bracha. Going to move through the body in a brief scan and exploration, relating to what is being experienced here in our body as not just a static thing or feeling, but as something alive, streaming, emerging, and even emerging out from a source beyond itself. And so we'll begin from the bottom, begin from the place where our feet touch earth. Like the brachot that are those spaces dug into the ground. And beginning here, just by bringing our attention to the feeling and sensation of our feet touching whatever they're touching. Noticing the sensations that are here, tension, stillness or tingling, spaces of different temperature, whatever's there, to really just let yourself be aware of the quality of the sensation here, and opening ourselves up here for these brief moments to experience what's here in our own field of experience and sensation as something that is emerging, that is fluid and streaming in exactly the way that it is right now. And now, and now. What is here as an emergent stream from that great origin and pool. It may help here even to just direct the gentle Baruch to that space of feeling and sensation. Recognizing, turning to it as something that is Baruch, something that is expanding, emerging from its source. I invite you here to continue letting your awareness move at the pace that feels right, up from the feet to the ankles and calves. Letting yourself just explore all the sensation that's here as Baruch, as an expanding and moving and flowing stream of experience. No need here to remain on one area unless it calls you. And if it calls you or feels that it wants your attention, so you can bring your attention there and let it settle more into that space, bringing the eyes and focus of Baruch to it. And continuing to let your attention and awareness move up through the knees and the thighs and legs, sensing all that is here through the lens of Baruch. You can even really send that word Baruch to the feeling and sensation itself. If you want and feel that you want to get a little more intimate with your own sensations, you may bring Baruch Ta. Let yourself really lean into relating to your own experience here, relating to it as a you, as a living, dynamic presence that we can be in this kind of relationship with. Continuing here to let the attention and awareness move through the belly, lower back, spine, ribcage, encompassing the full surrounding areas of your body. Your own pace, moving all the way up toward the shoulders and collarbone and jaw and cheeks, eyes and eyelids, ears and forehead, scalp. And here, scanning, making space for all the sensations that are arising here to be in a fluid arising. And anything that is asking for your attention, to let your attention gravitate more closely to it with a gentle Baruch. Staying with the feeling and sensation as it continues to stream. Moment by moment by moment. Bringing a curious Baruch Atah, kind of unknown you and even unnamed you. Relates to this experience right here as a you that I do not know yet, that I'm not going to name, to be with, remain open to. This is just the beginning space from which we'll be continuing to deepen our exploration of the practice of brachot. And before we leave this internal space, just send a bruchim habayim, bruchot habaot, blessing to all that is coming here, into the whole space of your body and sensation, sending that energy of bracha to all of it. And noticing just the quality of feeling that's with you when you spend just a few moments with your experience in this way. We'll take one more full breath, and for those of you who feel ready to, invite you to come back to the shared space we have here. You can keep that feeling and attention to what's inside with you, even as you open your eyes and return to the room, the screen, this blessed little corner of space that we've been able to share together here. We are going to formally end the session here because we're at time. I'm going to stay on for, probably 10 minutes or so, give us some space to share, to ask questions, to share from what you experienced here in the practice or things that occurred to you during the last hour and a half we've had together. And for those of you who might want to follow up, I'm here, and Rabbi Daniel Silverstein is here for follow-up, and hoping that we can continue learning together in the coming weeks. So thank you all for joining. Anyone who needs to go now is welcome to. Anyone who wants to stay on and share or ask questions, we can do that here as well. And I would say for the questions, just unmute yourself, and questions or comments, just unmute yourself and hop in.
Hi.
Hi.
Can I ask? I understand the quote about the Adanim, the 100,
Mhm.
spaces where the Adanim went
Sockets.
in. Yes, sockets, that's the word. But what about 100 pools? Is that a different reference?
So it's a good question. Um, I'm not familiar so much, and I can look into the Shari Ora again and see if there's maybe in the footnotes or anything. I'm not familiar so much with the reference of the 100 pools, other from within that source, where he seems to be creating a link between the 100 sockets, the 100 adanim, to the statement of the Talmud that we must make 100 brachot every day.
Mm.
And based on that linkage of a brecha and the functioning of, we didn't get into this here, but that name Aleph Dalet Nun Yud is a very earthly um, earthly name of God. It's not the kind of more transcendent Yud Ke Vav Ke. It is the receptacle, the divine receptacle for those kind of more transcendent higher forms of the divine. So in a sense, he's relating those sockets to these 100 blessings, which are ways in which we encounter God here in our earthly experience and existence. So I'm not certain, but he might be drawing the one who's creating that parallel between 100 sockets and 100 brachot. I could look into it a little more. The one other thing that comes to mind is that idea of 100 pools might have something to do with the structure of the sfirot, of there being 10 Kabbalistic sfirot and a kind of 10 multiplied by 10 that creates 100. It's just kind of a guess of mine based on both that source and some other things that I looked at in preparing for the session. If I find anything, I'll share it with you.
Thank you.
I couldn't help but think when we were reading from Rabbi Epstein from the Aruch HaShulchan that what he was talking about, the reflection, sounded an lot like the Kabbalistic concept of rising up to draw down. And I'm surprised to find that in a Aruch HaShulchan. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
is that possible that he's saying that, or am I just reading that into it?
Well, it is a Kabbalistic concept, even as it is of Or Choser.
Okay.
And the Aruch HaShulchan is a really fascinating figure in that he was a Lithuanian halachist, legal scholar, and basically the chief dayan and halachic authority of his generation. He was also very close to the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Rebbe of Chabad, I believe, who was basically he went to study with at some point. So he himself was influenced by Kabbalah and Hasidism, and incorporated that into his legal writings. This isn't the only place he mentions Kabbalistic reasons and teachings in his halachic ruling. But yes, it is always a pleasant surprise to find these ideas kind of really there front and center in these very normative texts. In a sense, and I'll just say, this is kind of what it says to me, and it's not only here but elsewhere too. In a sense, I think you can't honestly really engage with the practice of brachot without getting into a deeper layer of what is this about anyway? Because it's not very satisfying to just say, oh, it's a nice thing to like remember God. And we see this also reflected in the Shulchan Aruch itself, which is the earlier kind of really authoritative codified book of Jewish halacha and practice, where in the same chapter that we saw this in the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Orach Chaim number 5, the Shulchan Aruch writes that when you make a bracha, you have to have intention to the meaning of the words you're saying. But then he goes on to explain the different names of God we use in the bracha and what each one of them mean. That in a sense, in the legalistic kind of framing of what the practice of bracha is, it's clear in many of the halachic writings that we need to have particular awareness of God that is unique. Like you'd say, that should be everywhere. It should be all the time, right? But it uniquely appears in the practice of brachot. And I think it's because we there's a recognition that it's required. The practice itself, in a sense, demands it. Anyone else want to share or say, speak? Yeah, please.
I
I see you, Betsy, and Rachel.
Yeah. Oh,
both.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
go
thank
ahead.
you, Rich. I have a question and a comment. I would say I'm a maybe advanced beginner in Hebrew, which is to say a beginner. And I had a rabbi who once made a case grammatically that the word Baruch meant the source of all blessing. And I wonder, not knowing enough at all about Hebrew grammar, if there's anything there.
It might. I'll tell you what comes to mind. Okay, I can't speak for the person who you heard it from. What comes to mind is Baruch. Baruch atah. Baruch is an adjective. It's an adjective. It's not necessarily grammatically a command. Right? Baruch atah could be, I bless you. I kind of cause blessing to you. Some of those kind of medieval works that I was talking about that had a lot of theological issues with the practice of brachot and the language of them, the Sefer HaChinuch comes to mind, makes a big deal out of saying that Baruch atah is actually not an activity, but an adjective saying you are the source of blessing. It's not only grammatical. There's like a side of that that's grammatical and a side of that that's theological. If that makes sense. So it has been argued that that's what the phrase Baruch atah means. You are the source of blessing. That's kind of there in some of the primary works. I think the more Kabbalistically inclined works read Baruch atah not merely as an adjective, but whether or not it's an adjective, there's an understanding that our awareness and experience when directed toward God is itself meaningful and impactful. And that the Baruch atah Hashem, with that kind of voicing that awareness, is an activity. And is not merely a kind of reference to or about God.
Description.
Yeah, it's not just a description. It's not just a description, but in turn, it's a turning toward and energizing that relationship.
I guess my bottom line is I like it. I like it, and I want it to be true. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that at some point along the way, you used a lot of analogies when you said the water cycle and the pools and the streams, but you also used the word current, which when you said it, to me, evoked electricity, which is also the energy thing. And I mean, this is all vague and I'm just kind of wrapping my mind around it, but there's some aspect of cycle, and that if there's the part about, well, what does it do for God for us to do this? Maybe one thing it does is it closes the circle so that we are part of the same current that the divine energy is I don't know, promulgating so that we're not, we aren't making it and we aren't taking from it, but it's kind of like that whole flow thing, it's like you're stepping into it and becoming part of the cycle. So I don't know what there is there, but that kind of popped out at me at several points.
I think it's a powerful image. And I don't want to make any claims to having knowledge of how metaphysical things work or don't work.
Or electrical, in my case.
Or electrical things, even that's as far as I'm concerned, metaphysics also. But there is one way where we can kind of perceive of this as making, like, not standing in the way of that current, but actually making more space for it to just sort of flow and blow through and to be received, right? That's the image of the receptacles for the water to flow into. There's a receptivity that we are opening ourselves up to in bracha. I also don't want to limit it to that, because the sources seem to be saying that there is an expansive quality that also comes through bracha. So that's what comes to mind.
Metaphors help, but then there's only so far they can go. Thank you.
Sure. Rachel, you wanted to say something before?
I wanted to say something and then I changed what I wanted to say in listening, because Betsy mentioned the cycle, and I had been thinking about the relationship between the water falling from blessing, which could be in the body or it could be energy, and the Ahava Rabbah, where if we follow the mitzvot, rain falls, and it feels very like the way Judaism would work, in a very literal way and in a very spiritual way. I just wondered if you had a comment about that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because as we're talking about the water cycle, I was thinking about the prayer in the Shemona Esrei in the Amidah, which some of you might be familiar with. Baruch Aleinu et Hashana Azot, right? And Baruch Hashanim, it's there in the middle. It's actually a prayer for rainfall, and in a sense, the language of that prayer is just saying, bless this year for good. Bless this year. What does it look like? And this is kind of what I want. When we talk about what it looks like, when you bless this year, God, it looks like a year of healthy rain. Right? That water is the essential expression of bracha. And I think we'll see water continuing to show up in some of the sources that we bring here. And yeah, you're right. The paragraph, second paragraph of the Shema speaks very explicitly there about the outcome, the consequence of being kind of attuned and aligned with God's desire of us in this world is that the rain's going to fall. There's a lot that can. One other association comes to mind on this kind of water cycle imagery is that the Talmud in Ta'anit, which is all about rain, says that there's no, a measure of rainfall that comes from the heavens is preceded by two measures of water that arise from the depths. And it seems on the surface to be describing some kind of conception of how, water rises from the deep beneath the earth, and the rain in kind of consonance with the water falling from the heavens. But Kabbalistically, that's also taken to kind of something that I believe Stephen was kind of referenced before, which is the idea of the awakening from below, the listening and awakening from above. This is literally spoken of in the Kabbalistic sources as lower waters and upper waters. Right. So our movements toward God and God's movements toward us are spoken about in terms of forms of water, streams of water moving toward one another. That's kind of what comes in where your comment kind of evokes for me. Maybe time for one more, or if we're good here, we're good here as well. Okay. So thanks. Hope we can continue together. And I really appreciate all of you being here and sticking out to the end and having the opportunity to share this story that's so precious to me with all of you. Okay, so take care. Good night, good day. Take care, everybody.
Good day, good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Toda Rabah.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very